Welcome back to Give It Thought. As always, I'm Jake, and today I present you with my top 10 games of 2016. This year was full to the brim with excellent games and some not so excellent games, and this list was incredibly difficult for me to make. A few disclaimers before we dive in. These games are the ones that I had the most fun with this year, not necessarily the best games of the year. Knowing that, there may be some notable absences, and some odd inclusions. One in particular that I think will throw a lot of people off. Oh, I'm gonna get so much hate for it. Now that that is out of the way, let's get started. At number 10 is Dishonored II. In this sequel, you can actually play as either Corvo or Emily Caldwin, the girl you rescue at the end of the first game, and who is Corvo's daughter. This game is set 15 years after the first, where Emily has taken over from her assassinated mother. A serial killer is on the loose and is killing all of Emily's adversaries, which makes everyone think that Emily and Corvo are behind the murders. All of this leads to an assassination attempt on Emily, and after that you are free to choose your character. The rest of the game is spent stealthily, or not so stealthily, getting revenge for being so dishonored. Sorry, I had to. I feel bad placing this game so low on the list, but the reason it falls into place at number 10 is that it feels a little too much like the first game to me. Also, the guards in this game had the eyesight of a falcon if you were on the ground. I'm not saying the game was too hard, but I must have reloaded saves 100 times during my first playthrough. And you can't replay missions once they're over, which really bothered me. It just seemed to give stealth-focused players a really difficult time. All that said, it capitalized on what made the first game great. The powers this time around, especially Emily's domino, just made the game that much more strategic. I love the duality of the game's outcomes with the chaos variances, which is even more pronounced this time around. The characters, the lore, and the design are nearly unmatched in gaming today. In the end, Dishonored 2 was much better than the first in most ways, and that makes it one of the best games of 2016. At number 9 is No Man's Sky. I know I'm gonna get some real blowback for this one in the comments, but I really like the game. If I left it off, I would be lying to you, and I'm nothing if I'm not honest about my preferences. In No Man's Sky, you play as the Traveler, a being who explores the galaxy in search of answers. Answers to what? Well, by the end we start answering questions regarding existence itself. There's not much more to go into story-wise about this game, and really any more details would kind of spoil the only thing that keeps you playing, so I'll leave it at that. Now, any regulars to this channel have heard my complaints about this game and what I like about it, so I'll keep it brief. No Man's Sky is empty. Too empty for most players, which is why it saw over a 90% drop in players after the first week. The crafting loop is really shallow, and in all honesty, there's not much to do after you play so long, only move further towards the center of the galaxy. But I think No Man's Sky might hold more potential than any game I've ever played. We saw that with the Foundation update really improving the game just this past month, and if we get more of that, there's no telling where this game will take us. I just really enjoyed exploring this universe. I've said it before, this game is like a relaxing walk in the park for me. It puts me in this tranquil mood that no other game does, and I love it for that. I was as disappointed as the rest of you when this game came out earlier this year, but I learned to love it for what it was. The game also helped this channel get off the ground, so I kind of owe it a spot on this list. Number 8 on my list is none other than Pokemon Sun and Moon. In this iteration of the fantastic series, you play as a kid who recently moved from the Kanto region, which is the place from the first game, to the all-new tropical paradise of Alola. These two new entries actually shake things up a bit structure-wise and shun the concept of gym leaders for trial captains, which I thought was a really neat idea. We also got the brand new Z moves, which were, they were alright. I get their use competitively, but in-game they're almost like cheat codes for an already too easy game. And then we got another new batch of Pokemon, and if I'm being honest, I really like this generation's designs as a whole. The only one I have a problem with was Bruxish, and even then it's not really that big of a deal. I love each one of the Alolan form Pokemon, so no complaints there. This game, for whatever reason, just lost me after the Elite Four. I don't know what it was exactly. Normally with Pokemon games, I'm all in for about 3 months, training Pokemon's EVs and breeding for IVs, but this time I just set it down. I don't know if I'm growing out of it or what, but it just didn't hold my attention. Saying that, the time I did spend with the game makes me really excited for the next game, which is rumored to be on the Nintendo Switch. My biggest problem with it was probably the difficulty, which just seems to get lower and lower with every generation, while battling just gets even more and more complicated. But all in all, I really enjoyed this game, and it was by far the best game on the 3DS this year. And coming in at number 7 is Doom. This game was a return to form for single-player first-person shooters. I don't play much multiplayer, so I won't comment on that, nor will I comment on the snap map. Couldn't care less about it. Doom's plot is nothing short of amazing. It centers around a corporation trying to extract energy from hell to solve a world energy crisis. How insane is that? After an employee makes a pact with the demons, you are awoken, the Doomslayer, to stop the now invading demons. Again, how insane is that? There's not much bad to say about this game, honestly. The only thing I can think of is the AI is kind of dumb, but I think it's going for an old school feel, so it translates well. Not really a complaint, but more of like just something I noticed. The weaponry is amazing, especially the super shotgun. The boss fights were a breath of fresh air compared to most bullet spongy bosses most first-person shooters have these days. Another big thing for me, which led to multiple playthroughs, was the secrets that were extremely well hidden throughout the really well-designed levels. I must have played through the campaign 4 times without finding all of them, and it makes me want to play through it again and find that last Doom Guy doll I missed. id Software really hit it out of the park with this one, as they most often do, and I cannot wait for a sequel. I could go on for hours about all the good things about this game, but let's move on to number 6. And sitting in at number 6 is another JRPG, Final Fantasy 15. Just so you know, from here on out, my list could be almost interchangeable, except for number 1, so not many complaints from 6 down. In Final Fantasy 15, you play as Noctis, a boy looking for revenge against the Imperial Army for killing his father. The plot gets really complicated, so I won't go into it too much. Also, I don't want to spoil anything because it is really good. I will say, at the end, I was moved to tears, which has only happened 2 other times in a video game. Yeah, that's how attached you get to the characters in this game. My biggest problem with this game, and the reason it wasn't sitting at number 2 or 3 on this list, is the camera. Once you get to the larger enemies, it's terrible. I feel like Dragon Age Inquisition got that part as right as any third-person RPG could get, so why did Final Fantasy 15 take a step back from that? It was just a constant annoyance throughout the game, and Chapter 13... oh god. Not much to say about that hasn't already been said, but gosh, it was terrible. It almost made me put the game down, honestly. In spite of all these complaints, the game is nearing gaming nirvana when everything is working right. I grew up with this series, playing each and every one multiple times, and I'm always happy when the next game in the series releases. Final Fantasy 15 blew me away like I haven't been since Final Fantasy X back on the PS2. The battle system can feel a bit rough at first, but once you learn the basics, it quickly becomes second nature. I just wish the camera worked half the time during fights. It holds this game back from perfection, honestly. And hitting the list at number 5, and this is where the list started getting extremely difficult to order, is Hyper Light Drifter. The story behind this game is as interesting as the game itself, and provides a lot of explanation for its story. The game is based off ideas from one Alex Preston, who was born with congenital heart disease. He wanted to make a game that was a throwback to the SNES era of gaming, and more specifically The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And boy did he. In the game, you play as the Drifter, armed with your energy sword and whatever gun you choose to equip. You exist in this beautifully crafted world that seems like every pixel was placed lovingly at every turn. Ooh, I just love looking at this game. I'm going to be honest, I don't normally like games like this, Zelda-style action games. They just aren't my cup of tea, which is why this game took number 5 instead of 1 for me. But this game grabbed me from start to finish. In fact, I played through it twice in 4 days when it hit the PS4. Just the look of the game is enough to warrant a purchase. The music and ambient noise is phenomenal, and the little cutscenes that play when the Drifter has one of those fits are as beautifully crafted as the overworld. My only problem with the game was that I found it a little too forgiving at some points, especially for mini-bosses. I feel like leading up to those should have been a little bit tougher. I'm not trying to flex or anything, the game was fairly difficult overall, just sometimes I wish you had less health packs when going against the baddies. Hyper Light Drifter will be one of those games I revisit until my death, and I just love it. Coming in at just past the halfway mark at number 4 is the extraordinary Firewatch. This is a game that I unfortunately can't recommend to a lot of people. Firewatch is commonly referred to as another one of those walking simulator games, but I just think that's too pejorative. In Firewatch, you play as Henry, a guy who watches for fires. Creative naming, I know. Whose only source of human connection is Delilah, who comes through a walkie-talkie. The game takes place throughout an entire summer where you play through different chapters which poses days that can take place at night or in the daytime. If it feels like I'm going light on the details about the game, you're correct. This is because that is what Firewatch has going for it. And it's not necessarily the story, but the interaction of the two leads. I feel like a sommelier when I talk about games like this because I believe they are an acquired taste. Games like Firewatch, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, and Gone Home are games that video game veterans like because they've seen most everything video games have to offer at some point. You can only max out a character's level cap so many times during a lifetime. The truth about Firewatch is that it is a beautifully crafted game, maybe even tying Hyper Light Drifter for the prettiest game this year. It is a true testament to the artist Ollie Moss who created the backdrops for all of Firewatch's environments. Going through a specific part called Thunder Canyon is truly one of those gaming moments that defined 2016 for me, and I will always remember this year fondly because of that moment. This game was one of the best reviewed games this year, and it's for a reason. Firewatch may not be a game in the traditional sense, but you use a controller to navigate through a story, and that's enough for me. At number 3 is a game that I bet some people would have thought was my number 1 by the way I talked about it on Twitter, and that is Dragon Quest Builders. Whew, I love this game. It was the genre mashup I never knew I wanted. Take Minecraft and Dragon Quest and mix them up in a blender and you get Dragon Quest Builders. Throughout different chapters, which increase in difficulty as you progress, you play as Bildrick, and you are tasked with restoring small towns to their former glory by, surprise surprise, building them back up. At the end of each chapter is a boss fight, and for the most part, each of them is challenging in their own way. When I got to the first boss battle in chapter 1, I had no idea how to beat that golem and had to use some cause and effect. Luckily, throughout the chapters, you can usually spot which item you need to beat the big baddies, so it's not too difficult. There's a free play mode too that I didn't mess with much, but it's there for the creative types. I'm a huge Dragon Quest fan, and a not so huge Minecraft fan, but this game blew my expectations out of the water back in October. I had seen a bunch of gameplay since it came out in January in Japan, but it was just a joy to play once I got my hands on it. I probably put more time into this game than any other one this year except number 2, which you'll see why in a second, but I just can't sing enough praises for Dragon Quest Builders. One gripe I have with the game is that the combat is really shallow. If there was some sort of level up system for your character, it really would have helped, but the chapter structure kind of makes that impossible. Hopefully if a sequel gets made, they'll do away with that structure and make the game more open-ended, where you can journey to the next town in the same world after you finish building that one back up. Not many games come as highly recommended as this one from yours truly. And for the penultimate entry, we have quite the mood change. It's Dark Souls 3. In Dark Souls 3, you play as the Ashen One, who is tasked with returning the Lords of Cinder and a prince back to their thrones to restore order. This game's plot is really apocryphal, and I'd be lying if I said I understood it all. Regardless, it is really interesting to see how the story plays out. It's dark, scary, horrifyingly difficult at times, and super satisfying. If you have the time to dive into the backstory of this trilogy, I suggest you do because it is so twisted and bizarre that I don't see how it would not have an effect on your psyche for a little while. This series has been an odd one for me. I absolutely loved the first and third entries of this series, but the second one I just could not get into for some reason. Dark Souls 3 was a game that I spent the better part of this year with just trying to master each area to the best of my ability. This game will test your patience more than anything, and it's the first time I ever played straight through one of these games. I will say I did enjoy Bloodborne more overall, especially once I adjusted to its speed when compared to the Souls games, but Dark Souls 3 runs a close second. The weird thing about this game is that it is not very recommendable because most people just don't have the time to sink into it. I was playing for about 4 hours every day until I finished it twice, and that took me quite a while because I like to explore every nook and cranny of the game. Sadly, I haven't been able to dive back in with the recently released DLC yet, but I plan on it sometime in February. It makes me sad that this is the last game in the series, according to the series creator, but I urge you, if you like challenge and you have some semblance of patience, give this game a try. And really quick, here are some honorable mentions that I would have loved to put on this list, but I just didn't have room. And finally, the moment we've all been waiting for. My number 1 favorite game of 2016 is Ratchet and Clank. Where do I start with this one? This game and Dark Souls 3 came out around the same time, and as weird as it sounds, I was jumping back and forth between them, and it made me see the contrast that video games can have. Honestly, it really showed me, once again, how flexible this medium is and why I love it so much in the first place. In the reboot of the Ratchet & Clank franchise, you play as, you guessed it, Ratchet & Clank. You journey through the story of the first game in the series mixed with the story from the underrated movie. I'm a super fan, so of course I loved it. All the while doing the normal Ratchet and Clanky stuff, collecting bolts and their gold variants, leveling up your absurd weaponry, and blowing enemies to bits with said weaponry. I'm not going to talk about the story really, just because it is so not important. This game is PS2 era platforming at its finest, and that's a point I will return to in a second. This series has taken somewhat of a dive in the past few entries, with the exception of Into the Nexus, where it tried to find its place among today's ever-changing game landscape. We had a decent tower defense game, and a downright terrible 4-person co-op entry, but things have thankfully gotten back to basics in this year's reboot. The reason this game takes the #1 spot this year is that it reminded me how fun games could be. Sure, you have your Fallout 4s and Witcher 3s, where you get so utterly sucked into those universes that you forget to feed yourself, or worse, your pets. Hyperbole, folks. But are those games what you would call fun? Maybe to some, but those games to me are more about accomplishing something. Ratchet & Clank was pure, unadulterated joy. And that's what I used to think video games were. Growing up, straight up abusing my NES with Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong with my cousins created that yearning for this feeling of amusement and enjoyment that I look for as an adult, but rarely find. This game, Ratchet & Clank, has been the first time I've come across that feeling in a long time. And that's my list. I know a lot of people are going to give me the internet equivalent of a gang beatdown for having No Man's Sky on this list, so why don't you be first in line to do that down in the comments. Be sure to tell me which games I should have had on here, or if you agreed with my entries on this list down below. But I think that's where I'm going to wrap things up today. If you enjoyed this video, you know what you have to do. Smack that like button for me, follow me on Twitter at GiveItThought1, and make sure you subscribe. It's really important for, reasons. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, give thought to everything.